Your Locked On Canucks, your daily podcast on the Vancouver Canucks. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to another episode of Locked On Canucks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Nick Bondi, and with me today, as always, my brilliant co-host, Lachlan Irvin. Lachlan, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Bondi. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. You know what? Training camp has officially started. You know, it's like the first day of school for a lot of people covering hockey, right? It's like that first day of school vibe, and I'm really excited to finally talk about some action on the ice. It's been a while, and now we can finally get to it, right?
Yeah, it's like the first day of school, particularly this year, if you'd spent your entire summer vacation on the island from Lost, because we've just been gone for the last almost 2 years, at least a year and a half, at least, not being able to see anybody, not being able to go to games necessarily. And so now you're getting to see clips of all the media people at training camp. You're seeing fans in the stands in Abbotsford. It's good to be back. It's good to be back to whatever this new normal kind of is right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And as we mentioned, we've got a lot of stuff to talk about in training camp. But first, we have to talk about anytime Jim Benning has a media availability, I feel like it has to lead any Canucks podcast, right? Like it's a rare sighting from Jimbo, and we had one yesterday. All the Big J journalists got together and decided to ask Jim Benning a bunch of questions, and presumably, as everyone thought, there was going to be a lot of questions on Elias Pettersson and Quinn Hughes. Like, I feel we're going to be leading with this topic a lot until either one of them or both of them are signed. And he said pretty much that he's disappointed that they're not going to be there for the start of camp, and he doesn't think they're far away with CAA, which is the agency that represents both Elias Pettersson and Quinn Hughes. Now, Darren Drager, right after that, aka Mr. CAA, as he's known on Twitter, he's very plugged in with CAA, said they're actually not close at all. So a little negotiation over Twitter going on there. He also said that his organization will be 100% vaccinated by the start of the season. He also said Sutter isn't going to be available to start, which is quite not even surprising. Like, we're already starting the Sutter injury thing. Hamnick, is going to be eventually there at training camp. There's some sort of holdup. Rumors online saying he hasn't been vaccinated yet, but I mean, if the report is true that everyone's going to be 100% vaccinated, you kind of do have to be if you're on a Canadian team with all the border travel, right? So It sounds like I assume he's going to be vaccinated at some point.
Sounds like it's something else. Sounds like it's unrelated to that,
yeah,
which is good.
And Justin Bailey has tested positive. Apparently, he tested positive trying to get at the border. So he's going to be missing a bit of time at training camp. Lachlan, your thoughts on Jim Benning's press availability?
I think he did a good job at least instilling faith in the direction of the teams, for the short term. You can't talk too much about Pettersson and Hughes right now just because of how long it's going to take until that gets done. Obviously, that's the most pressing thing on everybody's mind. But as far as the way that they're entering training camp, it's good to know that everybody's coming in 100% vaccinated. You know that you're going to have more or less a very large group of players that you didn't have before, a much bigger training camp at your disposal than in years past, and just being able to really give the opportunities to some players to see them really get to show their stuff and potentially fight for that playoff spot is great. For that roster spot, I should say. Obviously, the Pettersson thing is the biggest worry, though. Jim Benning's obviously not going to come out and be like, "Oh, we're far apart, we're decades apart." He has
very little leverage as is. He has very little leverage as is. He's not going to blow up his spot by saying we desperately want them here, right? That's not negotiating 101.
No, absolutely not. And
sorry, that is negotiating 101. That is what not negotiating 101 would be saying we need him, please come back.
Yeah, exactly. And with the reports that came out right away, pretty quick after that, there's clearly still a gap there. It's really going to come down to the question of who kind of jumps first on this, because I mean, clearly there's no extra money coming in. Not at least until, say, Michael Furland is officially on IR. I mean, I believe he's technically already there now. But there's no extra money coming in. So it's just a matter of how much like serious negotiating do you really still need to do? Are you trying to hold out and are just refusing to jump off of your existing number and deal, or are you willing to make the sacrifice? And at the end of the day, that's kind of what it's going to come down to. How desperate are you to get them to training camp, to preseason, or to the first game of the regular season?
Yeah, and it sounds like the holdup is Elias Pettersson and Quinn Hughes want that long-term money, right? They want like the big salary over long-term, and Jim Benning and the Canucks are like, well, we can't really offer you that. How about a bridge deal at a bit lesser salary? And then, you know what? Like, if I'm Elias Pettersson and Quinn Hughes, like we said it before on this podcast, right? I think both of them are signing matching 3-year, $8 million deals. That was my prediction at the start of all of this, when it seemed like there was going to be some sort of holdout. If I'm Elias Pettersson and Quinn Hughes, why not bet on yourself, take that 3-year short bridge deal, and then, re-up in 3 years, and you can probably get like the same salary at the very least, or even a bit more, right? Like, take the 3-year deal, 3 times 8, and then bet on yourself. If Elias Pettersson tears it up for the next 3 years at $8 million, he's worth like 10 and a half if he wants to re-sign after that on a long-term deal, right?
Undoubtedly so. I mean, he's only going to get better from here. I don't think there's any doubt that whatever bridge deal they offer him, most likely he is going to break the ceiling on that value pretty quickly. The main thing, obviously, just being the fact that, already they're arguably worth more than the Canucks are going to offer them. Like, I don't think anybody's under the impression that they're asking for too much money. Other than the fact that the team doesn't have it. They just want their value at this point, which is already pretty high, and that's being proven by the contracts that we've seen handed out in the last few days. That's been proven by the contracts handed out to other players in the past. It sucks that it's gotten to this point, but it does seem like we're reaching a point where it really is going to come down to betting on yourself, and more importantly, the Canucks having to bet on the ability to sell a vision to them that they don't seem to be able to sell them on right now.
Yeah, and I think, we talked about this on the last show, which you can go listen to. It's important for the Canucks to get these guys signed and have some sort of salary structure again, right? Like, we do not want a situation where, a guy like Louis Eriksson is making the most on the team and he's in the press box 90% of the games, right? Like, we don't want another one of those situations. The Canucks certainly don't want it. So it's important to get them at the right number. But again, I just keep coming back to Elias Pettersson seems like the new mold of hockey player, right? He's a guy who's flashing the Balenciaga on Instagram. He's doing like the Twitch streams and everything. Like, he's very in tune with like, the modern day way.
He's a marketer's dream in this. He's a promoter's dream. Like the team could be doing so much with him.
So if you're Elias Pettersson, I'm betting on myself. I take a 3-year deal, $8 million per, and then see if I can get that big payday in 3 years' time, right?
Right. It's getting there, especially, the Canucks obviously want the bridge deal as well because it buys them more. It buys a few RFA years without seeping into that precious UFA status. And I think that's really the biggest holdup for them is the fact that they want the ability, like every player, they want the leverage that they deserve, and they want the ability to come back to the negotiating table on the next contract and say, well, if this team's not working, I don't want to stay. And that seems to be, I imagine that's where the stalemate is at this point, is the fact of both. I know, especially Hughes, I've heard is really that camp has really been gunning for a deal that gets him to UFA status simply because of, because he could get more on the open market and he can.
And that's what Makar signed as well. Like Makar's deal, when it's up, he's going to be a UFA.
Exactly. And frankly, in the Canucks, it would have been in the Canucks' best interest to go for that big long-term contract, even if it buys into UFA, because it would have given you a lot of time on it with a great defenseman through most of his prime, the majority of it. But that's not really possible under their cap structure. So it really comes down to the fact of can they can they convince both of these players that it's worth at least sticking around potentially, instead of for, say, like the max 8 years that they would have, closer to that, another, say, 11 or so, because you're looking at at a +3 on top of maybe signing that max 7 or 8 down the road.
Yeah, and with Elias Pettersson and Quinn Hughes out of training camp, there's obviously going to be a lot of opportunities for other players to step up in training camp, right? Like with those two guys out, there's going to be tons of opportunities. One of those guys could be a player the Canucks signed on a PTO in Alex Chiasson. But before we talk about Alex Chiasson, I want to talk to you about BetOnline.ag. BetOnline.ag is your number one spot for all the pro and college football action this season. With a new and updated site and interface, even more odds, props, and contests, BetOnline.ag continues to be the number one source for everything football. Head to the website or use your mobile device to sign up today to receive your 100% welcome bonus. That's double your initial deposit just for signing up. Don't forget to use the promo code NFL100. BetOnline.ag, your online sportsbook experts.
Does this sound familiar? You've got one device that lets you catch the game live, another that lets you stream your favorite shows, you're watching sports highlights on your phone, and you've got your neighbor's best friend login for all the good stuff. Well, I want to tell you about a simple way to get all that entertainment you love without the hassle, and a great way to finally get your TV together. It's called DirecTV Stream, and it brings your live TV and on-demand favorites together like never before, so you can watch your favorite sports, movies, and shows all in one place. That means no more juggling remotes and no need to buy another device ever again. And the best part, there's no annual contract. So get rid of the clutter and the confusion and get your TV together with DirecTV Stream. You can learn more at directtv.com. That's directtv.com. Compatible device required. Content varies by package.
Okay, so news came out yesterday that Alex Chiasson signing a PTO, professional tryout, with the Vancouver Canucks. And this was surprising to me because it wasn't too long ago Alex Chiasson was scoring 20+ goals with the Edmonton Oilers, right? Like he was locked on the hip of McDavid for a lot of that. So not surprising.
Yeah.
A lot of players are going to score a lot of goals if you're playing with McDavid on a regular basis. But it still was pretty shocking to me. Again, he's not far removed from a 20-goal season, and he couldn't get a regular deal. So, I mean, Lachlan, Alex Chiasson, does he have an actual shot of making this team? Because, the Canucks made a big deal about going out and signing a bunch of players for their AHL team, and looks like Abbotsford Canucks are probably going to be one of the better teams in the AHL to start their inaugural season. But, the Canucks do have a lot of depth, and is there any chance Alex Chiasson could make this opening night roster?
I think it's entirely possible, especially with the loss of Tyler Mott, at least for the beginning of the year. I think it's well within the possibility that they look at him as a good depth signing. I think he's going to have to really battle for it. There's a lot of younger guys who are going to, especially like homegrown prospects, that are going to be worth giving a bigger look to, because of the fact that they have a more long-term future with the Canucks. But like you said, it's not long ago he was playing a lot of minutes with Connor McDavid on the Oilers. Granted, that team was a little bit light on the depth side of things, but overall he's always put up a decent number of points on teams that have not necessarily always been the absolute best. I think that the option is there at the very least, that let's say he looks pretty good. He looks decent in camp. It's a possibility that right now that they maybe look at, say, a two-way contract for a guy like Alex Chiasson, because again, this is the benefits of having your AHL team in Abbotsford now.
Absolutely.
Is this a fact that you can send players down? Potentially, you can convince players, veteran players, to take a pay cut to play pretty much in the same market, to play essentially. You might be playing on in a smaller arena in front of less fans and to less fanfare, but you're still going to get a decent paycheck that way, and you're going to be playing in a top market with the option of potentially getting called up to the Canucks later on. I think at the very least they're not putting all their eggs in one basket. They're doing a very good job of potentially finding a few guys who might be surprises during the preseason and might prove that they're worth a real shot at the NHL level. I could see him playing fourth line minutes and being a decent depth winger. But overall, yeah, I think this is just good. This is just good management, right? This is good asset management as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, the favorite term of every fancy stat guy out there, asset management. But you know what? I think it's an open competition for those fourth line wings, right? Like, I think, and we're going to talk about this a bit later with that middle six competition. But I think the players in there are pretty much set in stone. It's a matter of who's playing with you. But that fourth line left wing, that fourth line right wing is pretty much wide open, right? Like, I think most people penciled in Brandon Sutter as the fourth line center to start the season. But yeah, Alex Chiasson, why not? If he has a good camp, why not give him a shot on the fourth line and see what he can do? I'm still holding out hope for my boy Nick Pettersson to make the team out of on the opening night. And you know what? We forgot to mention this yesterday, Lachlan. You know who Nick Pettersson's head coach was with the Portland Winterhawks in junior?
Was it Travis Green?
It was Travis Green. So there's a connection there already. There's a connection there. Granted, it did not work out with Sven Baertschi. Did not work out with Derek Pouliot, that junior connection. But you know what? Why not give it another shot? Why not? Again,
I don't know why you needed to remind me of. I don't know why you need to remind me of Derek Pouliot today. I didn't need that today. This is supposed to be a fun day.
Well, you know what? Like the connection's there, and again, like I think Alex Chiasson has a chance to make this team out of camp. If he has a strong camp. Again, the fourth line, it's wide open on the wing, so. I think he very much has a shot. And I'm just intrigued by a guy, again, who scored, a ton of goals with the Oilers not too long ago, picking him up on a PTO and potentially getting him on a low cost deal. And you mentioned Abbotsford. Yeah, I think that's a big selling point for a lot of these guys. Why don't you think Abbotsford got so many of these, quote unquote quad A guys to start their inaugural season, right? Because it's close by to the NHL team. It's an easy call up. And, you can flex your financial might in the AHL without really going against the salary cap, right? So it's even if Alex Chiasson doesn't make the team out of camp, he becomes another great player for, the Abbotsford Canucks.
Exactly. You're just giving yourself more opportunity that say for a guy to potentially sprout some wings or refine their game in Abbotsford and get that call up, and you have that opportunity to do so because you've made the effort to go out and find a lot of low cost, low risk signings. I think it's gonna be interesting to see if Chiasson can make himself kind of stand out among that group, that group of guys fighting for those fourth line wings. I think it's possible. I think he's gonna especially have a big fight with guys like Matthew Highmore. I think is gonna get a lot of opportunities. I think you're gonna see. You mentioned Nick Pettersson as somebody else who's probably gonna be in that mix as well. Even you look at say like Will Lockwood looks usually very good. In the beginning of training camps, he's had a lot of good training camps. He's the
training camp McDavid. He looks really good in training camp every year, and then when it comes to the games, it's okay, cool.
He's okay. He's never been a minus, I don't think, in any of the NHL games. But yeah, he's never necessarily stood out completely. But yeah, William Lockwood is probably a guy that they'd be wanting to give every single potential opportunity to because he's only 23, and whereas Chiasson's already 30, so he's gonna have some real hurdles. He's going to have some people he's really going to have to prove that he can play at a higher level than. But either way, he's giving himself a good opportunity. And you kind of mentioned it with Pettersson and Hughes earlier. He's betting on himself. That's what Alex Chiasson is doing here.
Yeah, and I think for Alex Chiasson, it's a good opportunity to try and make a NHL squad that again they have a spot open on the fourth line, and we know this is the Vancouver Canucks. Injuries are going to happen, right? So he's shown before that he can move up in the lineup and play there in a pinch. So I can see that why Alex Chiasson decided to give a shot with the PTO with the Vancouver Canucks, because there's a shot there. If there's injuries, he can maybe move up the lineup. Again, the Canucks have at least a few options for competent depth this season. And if you can add Alex Chiasson to the mix, I think again, you're swinging for the fences here with Alex Chiasson. Either, you're going to have a home run and he's going to be look like a good fit in the forward group, or you send him down to the AHL and then you can forget about him, right?
Yeah. And even if it's a complete mess, it's a pro tryout. Who cares? You don't have to work. There's no long-term effects on that. So yeah, your odds on this working out for you are pretty good. It's pretty low risk. And I say this a lot. I say this a lot about like past cup champions. One of the things that they do so well, like every cup champion has really good, like just capable depth. They don't need to be superstars. They just need guys who can replace one another, can come up, play a season or two, and take over if there's injuries or what, etc. All the best teams are able to just keep replenishing that third and fourth line. They never bring them in for max contracts or like insane amount of money. They just keep finding cheap players and just rotating through them year after year after year. And that's how some teams are able to either stay on top or they get you see a lot of teams make the cardinal mistake of, say, giving those guys big money because they won a championship, and then you kind of see them take a dip over the next few years. So if the Canucks are looking at it in that regard, where they look at it as this is part of the capable depth sort of direction, that's good for them. That's a very good thing for them, and it's a direction they should have been looking at a long time ago, but at least they're getting to it now.
Yeah, and another interesting thing to watch in Canucks training camp is going to be the battle for the middle six forward roles. But before we get to that, I want to talk to you about Rock Auto. This episode of Locked On Canucks is brought to you by Rock Auto. With the ever-increasing number of makes and models, it's now possible for your local chain auto parts store to stock all the parts you need. Why endure often pointless or seemingly intimidating questions and wait while the person behind the counter orders the parts on their computer, choosing the only brand their warehouse happens to carry? You have computers with access to rockauto.com at home and in your pocket. You can save time and money while using Rock Auto. Rock Auto is a family business serving do-it-yourself for over 20 years. Rock Auto prices are reliably low for every customer. Nothing worse than getting overcharged for a part at a local auto shop. They have everything you can need: brake parts, tail lamps, motor oil, and even new carpet. Go to rockauto.com right now and see all the parts available for your car or truck. Right, Locked On in there. How did you hear about us box, so they know we sent you. Amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need. rockauto.com. Okay, so the middle six battle in the forward group for the Vancouver Canucks is one to watch. I think, it's arguably the most interesting, and maybe even more so with Elias Pettersson still out holding out for a new contract. I think at the beginning of the year, if everyone's there, I would have penciled Bo Horvat as a second center. Obviously, Jason Dickinson as a third line center. I think we can all agree on that. And the wings are to be determined. Vasily Podkolzin, I think, would be cool to play either the second or third line. Tanner Pearson, Bo Horvat's best buddy, I think he's gonna have a good shot to make that second line right wing. Niels Höglander, does he still get a chance to play on the second line left wing with Podkolzin here? A lot of interesting things to consider. And you know what? With Elias Pettersson still holding out, does this mean we're going to see JT Miller at center? The whole reason why they traded for Jason Dickinson to avoid this situation. Are we actually going to see JT Miller as a center at some point for the Canucks? There's a lot of interesting questions to consider for the Vancouver Canucks in that middle six forward group.
Yeah, well, if you want to look at what we might be seeing down the line here, at least in the short term without Hughes and Pettersson, Thomas Durant's actually just tweeted out the line rushes from the Group B. Group B just stepping on the ice a few minutes before we started recording here. He has JT Miller listed at center, centering Connor Garland and Vasily Podkolzin.
Okay, so JT Miller's second line center to start.
At least right now. Now, again, we should be very clear here that this is day one of training camp. We could be. No,
this is our job as people who cover the Vancouver Canucks. We need to overanalyze this.
Overreact and overanalyze everything. Correct. That's true. I mean, you love Nick Petan, and he centered Nils Höglander and Brock Besser earlier today.
There we go. That's top line Nick Petan. That's what I like to hear.
And then you have Horvat with Pearson and McEwen, and you know they're splitting the groups up obviously during the training camp because they have so many players to go through. But just looking into kind of reading into, you can definitely catch a glimpse of some of the early thinking from the team, like the idea that right now, at least Miller's probably more of a fill-in case right now because of Pettersson being out,
yeah.
and like as soon as he's comes back, I think you'll see the Lotto line very quickly come back. One thing that is interesting, that feels worth noting, at least right now, is you have an idea of like Justin Dowling on one of the lines they have is Justin Dowling playing with Matthew Highmore and Danila Klimovich, who is supposed to go back to junior. He's supposed to go to junior, but he's been very like animated about how he feels he could play in the NHL right now. Like he's been saying all the things.
I'm sure he feels it, but I don't think it's the best for his development. Send him, what I think for Klimovich, sorry to get off track here, but for Klimovich, just send him back to the QMJHL, let him score like 1.5, 2 points a game. And what's the rush? Getting some confidence.
There is no rush, but there is no rush right now. But you never know if, say, Klimovich comes into training camp, looks incredible. He might force them to go in that direction anyway. Like if he's just clearly that good, and it's entirely possible that he comes out and has like the best training camp ever. He might force his way in there anyway. I think that he's coming in at least with the confidence in himself that he can potentially win that spot. And sometimes that goes a long way. Like you could very easily at that level just say, this is what I do. I'm this good. I'm going to prove it when I step on the ice. And he might be able to change their minds. Overall, I think that's interesting. I think that's pretty interesting. I think you'll see, I think Miller's probably going to spend some time, playing center for the time being. I think you're going to see, I do find it already a good sign that Pettersson is playing with Garland. Like right now, I think I like that idea of having him playing with regular top NHL wings. I don't think there's any doubt in people's minds, at least right now, until we see him in some game action, at least that Pettersson is probably going to make the team, like right out of camp. He would have to be pretty bad to not, that's kind of the thought process right now.
On the middle six, penciled in.
It's his to lose.
And it's just a matter of finding the right fit. That you want him on a second line where he can show his opportunities to show that offensive flair that we've seen. Like I remember watching the World Juniors on Pettersson. He's a great passer. Like there's so many opportunities where he had like an amazing pass and then his Russian teammate just couldn't finish. So do you want him in that type of opportunity, or do you want him on a third line, which we know Travis Green likes his third line, especially to be a matchup line? Do you want him to be a matchup guy? I mean, that's a question they got to figure out.
I do think that in this particular season, the way the Canucks are structured at forward, if you put him on the third line, I actually think he'll be still pretty well put in a spot where he's going to be able to play a lot of like offensive minutes. I think he's still going to get those opportunities. I think especially the addition of Jason Dickinson really gives me hope that he'll be able to still do the things that makes Vasily Pettersson special, without having to worry that they don't have like that stabilizing force there. Because sometimes that's your biggest worry with the younger guys, is they're still learning defense, especially when you're so used to having the puck all the time. And with Dickinson, he's the stabilizing force potentially on that third line. If you put him if you put Pettersson with Dickinson and say Tanner Pearson, who I expect to be on that third line, that's a scoring line. Like that's a good looking scoring line.
Sure, they can be a scoring line, but is Travis Green going to deploy him as such?
I think he will. I think he'll give him, I think at the very least, he'll give him every opportunity to succeed in the early going. Like, I think putting him on the third will mean not only will he not always be playing the toughest matchups, like say an Elias Pettersson-led line is going to for sure be just put up against the shutdown line of the other team. Bo Horvat's line is obviously going to get tougher minutes, especially when you factor in that Connor Garland's probably on that wing and Nils Höglander. I think that third line is going to get the benefit of some really prime matchups in the early going. And I think it could benefit Pettersson pretty well if he's playing with that group.
Yeah. And I think for Connor Garland, like he's going to be an interesting player to watch going forward, because I think most people have him penciled in as that second line right wing. And I'm interested to see, the chemistry if he has better chemistry with Bo Horvat, or I guess for now, JT Miller, right? Like it's going to be, I'm going to be fascinated to see like how Connor Garland gets utilized in this middle six.
Yeah, I think he's going to. I think they're going to be pretty adamant to try and get back that lotto line together, at least when they can, because of how well they work together. But if not, I do think that there's definitely a possibility that you look at the idea of, say, putting Miller on line 2 later down the road, and maybe going with Garland on line 1 if you really need, like, you're really going all in on the scoring. I think the best part about this group that they have, at least in their top 6, if you're looking at, let's say everybody signed you, it's Pettersson, Besser, Höglander, Horvat, Miller, and Garland. Those guys are pretty interchangeable. Like, there are ways that you can shuffle between those groups that would work out well for different needs. Like, you can very easily have, say, ideally you have them pretty, like, you try to distribute the scoring as evenly as possible with them, because you don't want to have such a top heavy group. But if you're looking at a point where, say, you need late in the game, you just need a goal, maybe sometimes you throw Garland out there with Pettersson and Besser and see what they can do. And maybe you put Miller and Horvat to kind of just try and facilitate something a little bit more on the creative side of things. I think they have the opportunity here to really really mix up the groups as much as they can, and not without taking away from chemistry. And I think that's going to really benefit them.
Yeah, it's going to be there's going to be a lot of interesting battles to dissect in the Canucks training camp, and we're going to be talking about it a lot more tomorrow on tomorrow's episode. That has it for another episode of Locked On Canucks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Don't forget to listen to Locked On Bets. Betting on hockey doesn't have to be a guessing game if you listen to the new Locked On Bets podcast hosted by your boy Q and handicapping expert Lee Sterling. Get daily picks, blowout specials, wrong team favorite picks, and Lee Sterling's Lock of the Day. Follow the Locked On Bets podcast, brought to you by BetOnline.ag, wherever you get podcasts. Once again, this is the Locked On Canucks podcast. Thank you for making this the first listen in your day. And thank you for listening.